Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Michael Wann is here with me. This is episode number 22 of Project Kids. Good morning, Michael. It's Tuesday.
Good morning, Emily. Good morning, Laura. Good morning, all of the people who are playing along with us. But it may not be morning where you are.
So let's see. All right. I don't know where we're gonna go today. I have a feeling you may have some stories. I certainly have some stories. But before we move on and forward, I want to revisit our glass bead game of last week for a moment. For those of you who just received the Project Kids episodes and whatnot, if you want to, I give everyone a complimentary episode of the glass bead game to decide if they want to enter the game with us. Last week was a good one, so if you've not received your complimentary episode, you might want to hit me up for that one, or maybe it's just time to join the game. I think we opened up a lot of really interesting stuff last week, and then the universe, reality, simulation program showed up to confirm our, sort of some of the ideas we laid out and began to show me what else is possible with this.
All right.
Interesting experience on Friday night. But before we get to that, I want to say I just put the show out yesterday, and we also talked about some of the same topics at Conspiracy Cocktail on Saturday night, because we were kind of using the movie The Congress as a jumping off point. But I got an interesting comment, I guess last night or this morning, that we didn't quite catch. But remember when we were going over the statue that's on the top of the Texas Capitol?
Okay.
So apparently the person who designed the original Goddess of Liberty statue atop the Austin Capitol's name was Elijah E. Myers. And so we had gone down this whole Mike Myers, Austin Powers, kind of thread slightly. We didn't work that one all the way out, but there was yet another Myers sort of tie-in there.
There's another Myers tie-in. Good catch.
From our little dip, right? So Michael Myers, Austin Powers. I think I've seen maybe one or two, maybe one of the Austin Powers movies, and it's the kind of thing that, like, I don't know that I'm into that things that are like that silly, right? Generally, I would never have thought that would be a movie that gave us a lot of actual information about what is going on. But at this point, I've heard you reference them enough times, and this kind of connection, I'm like, all right, this would be a good place to hide like actual answers, not just innuendo at answers, right? Then all the stuff we look at intensely, all your Christopher Nolan films, all your J.J. Abrams series and stuff like that, right? It seems very serious, but like we can't quite get to the answer, right? It's just innuendo and a lot more work to figure things out. It would seem that like they'll just hide the plain shit in the goofy
without a doubt. And there was a time period like early 90s to probably 2001 when they put out a lot of these silly films. A lot of these films were also I don't believe Austin Powers was, but MTV Productions, whatever their production company was called, they put out a bunch of films, and that was like the Zoolander and all that sort of. Those movies are just like straight up in your face, like, and it's the perfect vehicle for hiding in plain sight. And then it seems to me that the storytelling put out by Hollywood changed their flavor post 9/11 in a couple different ways. Like you have like this one sort of I don't even know the word to describe it, but it'll be like Wes Anderson films and these kind of like quirky, thought-provoking sort of films. And then you got like some of the more serious films as well. But like that entire like silliness was more or less left behind. But we have talked about, and maybe this like bridges both of the gaps. I'm not, or timelines, because I'm not certain what the stretch is, but we talked about Men in Black. Mm-hmm. And, you said the same thing. You're like, I'm never going to watch Men in Black. And I'm like, you can't watch movies to want to be entertained. If you're going to watch it to be entertained as opposed to get information, well, then, maybe you can because you're special. But most of us, it's like, we need to have on the right sort of goggles in order to go and see things. And if you just want to be entertained, you miss a lot. And then also you're not in the right position to like really deconstruct the film.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. And yeah, the Men in Black was certainly, quite the documentary for sure. I mean, that has like, it's really almost a 1-to-1 on every issue.
Like what you were saying, the silly ones aren't like with like, you know, the real head thumpers of Christopher Nolan. Let me watch 7 times and have like a whiteboard going. It's like, no, you watch these other films and then they're like, this is how it is. But because we're all like Austin Powers, you're not paying any attention.
Yeah, your tip for me to, no matter what language the movie is in, to use the subtitles to help me understand what's going on, because it's hard. I've noticed in a lot of these really thought-provoking movies, it's sometimes hard to understand what's being said because the background noise is louder than the verbal, like the words.
Right.
So I've been doing that with everything, and I had this really interesting experience with that this weekend, and that I'll get to in a second. But I just wanted to mark that I'm going to tell you what I've been watching, and it's interesting with the subtitles. But your point, 2 things. Your point about the MTV production company, like paying attention to who the production companies are of these movies and what they're affiliated with, like, is super duper important. And one thing I noticed as I prepared for the conspiracy cocktail on the Congress movie this past weekend, when I was posting the trailer, that the movie was made by Drafthouse Productions, which I don't know because I've done zero research, but I'm going to go out far out on a limb that say whether it's provable or not, that's associated with Alamo Drafthouse, which is a company based here out of Central Texas, out of Austin and San Antonio, basically. And this was the first company to start doing these sort of more high-end movie theaters where you go and you get served alcohol and food. And they've been doing it since the 90s. It's much more common now. But there's Alamo Drafthouses all over the country. But that idea really comes out of Austin, like that. When I
Right. I mean, I'm looking right now. Drafthouse Films is a film distribution company based in Austin, Texas.
Right.
And it was founded by Tim League, who previously founded the Alamo Drafthouse cinema chain.
Okay, so I did no looking into it. So this was a different, this is an experience that emanated out of Austin, and they created this movie. And so my guess would be that this was the tip, that this is also what's going on in Austin, right? Like that's, I don't know how many movies before that they produced or what the other movies are, but I think it might be interesting to track that, because, the trends are definitely emanating out of Austin constantly at this point, right? But that was one that, it would be interesting to see if that's where the movie premiered first also as well. And I'm sure it probably is. But we have to start, and I know you and I do this, but we have to even spread out the ways in which we do this, is really start, I don't know if it's stop acknowledging or start acknowledging start acknowledging that there is no separation between the imaginary world and the real world really anymore, other than your ability to discern the what parts are coming from what, right? If they're producing this movie, right, then they're telling you that, like, hey folks, this is the deal, right? Because I didn't know when you and I did our show last week that movie emanated out of Alamo Drafthouse. So we
right.
went on about how Austin is basically what's presented in that movie. And we were showing how the Congress and the Pindar and the virtual reality and all this stuff is part of it. And then I go find out that movie comes from here, right? That the funding for that movie comes from here.
So, and it's also kind of interesting if you think about, it's, I'm going to assume it's driven. It's a combination of 2 things which are happening. But you're seeing primarily all of these traditionally California-based technology companies relocating to Texas, or to Austin in particular, and then with all of the political stuff which has been going on in California as well. Like, even if you're not in the technology industry, we're seeing like this big leave of the population from California to Austin as well. And so, just like, it's within the possibilities. You'd be like, oh, okay, like Hollywood will maybe follow suit of something like Silicon Valley, which you're like, oh, that'll never move from Northern California, and we're seeing it kind of. And so, is that possible for Hollywood, the other like really big industry which we think of from California? But Austin, just as your point, like Austin has like an established like major influence on culture, like primarily through music, but like, but there is also this movie thing. And as I'm looking at this, I've never made this connection before. I never knew about Drafthouse Productions, but just looking at that makes sense. But I've been doing all of this work on Ready Player One, which is a Steven Spielberg film. And one of the things which caught my attention was like, oh, it had its premiere at South by Southwest. And then I start seeing that I can remember this guy like from 15 years ago. His name is Harry Knowles, I think, Knowles. And he used to do film reviews. Ain't It Cool News? And I remember that from like 10 years ago. I haven't thought about him, but he's out of Austin, and he's got a link with the guy who founded the Drafthouse, the Alamona Drafthouse. And so you're beginning to see like that was always there. So if this transition does continue from California to Austin, like it's been that foundational web has already been well established, and we can get a feel of how it's going to also tweak too from to have like more of an Austin/Texas influence, or at least flavor in terms of how the business is done. So I want to throw that out.
And also, we had before Hollywood hubbed in Southern California and the tech industry hubbed in Silicon Valley, which is in Northern California, so about 5 or 6 hours away. And now they're all converging on Austin. So there's going to be a lot more, working together and doing coordinated collaborative projects together. And my guess would be is that having them both here is going to basically be turning the reality into a 3D interacted. Right.
You're so spot on, and that dovetails so nicely with like this story which I'm pulling together on Ready Player One and the metaverse. And I'm just like, I haven't been able to really find anything concrete, but it's just a natural assumption that Zuckerberg and Spielberg, like, of course they're connected. No matter how, but those are like the tech, that's Northern California and that's Southern California. And you see it coming together. And I always talk about it just coming together, like in the story, which I'm putting together, but you're saying like, no, we're seeing it happen. Like, as the metaverse, not like the Facebook metaverse, but what the metaverse represents, like as that has been birthed. And then we're seeing like Austin, and it's like all coalescing together to this next step on the path, which is being laid out, at least for the masses.
So one thing I have not seen since I've been here. So I obviously grew up in Los Angeles. And so I'm very familiar with seeing movies being shot on streets in neighborhoods, right? Like I'm used to seeing when you see the Hollywood star trailers and certain areas blocked off, and you see the catering area, you see, oh, okay, they're shooting a movie here. In fact, the neighborhood that I was living in Los Angeles just before we came here is one of the most used neighborhoods for like neighborhood scenery in television shows and movies. So it is not uncommon for me to step outside my door, go down the street, and one block over is like houses that you see in almost every television show ever, right? So, okay, so I'm very familiar with this scene. For all the movies and for all of the industry that is here, I've never seen that in Austin. All the years I've lived here, right? But when I moved here in 1999, that shift was just starting. Like people hadn't followed it yet, but like the corporations were starting to do that. And I've, lived here on and off over the course of the last 21, 22 years. I have never wandered upon a movie set here out in town, out in a more natural setting. The only time you see what looks like your Hollywood setup is when there's like a musical festival or a musical event. So my question is, are they no longer shooting street scenes because they're all being done just in the computer? Right?
100%. That's it. That is 100% it. So like, if you go and you're that is the logical next step, right? Like just from a business perspective, if you could go and show that I could go and create something that looks no different to the human eye, a backdrop, through computer programmers or even algorithms themselves, or I could go and build and like have to have sets and have to have like people like, catering and all that. You could get rid of all of that. The costs are going to be less. It's like all of this sort of stuff. And also with the whole thing with like the Alec Baldwin assassination, like, all right, well, this is one more reason you're not seeing the Hollywood stars so much moving over to Austin. You're going to go, they're moving to Australia. They're moving to Greece. It's like you're seeing the production company and like the know-how of making stories and writers and all of that happening, merging with the technology. And like, what's a celebrity going to be in the future? They're probably not even a thing. Like, I've never thought Justin Bieber. What's always made sense to me is the whole idea that Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus were from the same clone cell, and they're both introduced, and like, whether or not that's an actual fact or not, but that idea of all of the celebrities of anything in the future, they're just going to be made up characters, which is, a fair way of describing things how they've always been. But it's just going to be digital, and they're going to be put in these movies, and it's all going to be digital. It's all going to be digital with maybe voices. So that's maybe not even voices.
That's exactly what the Congress is about. Robin Wright has sold the rights to her image to Miramount, which is a play on Miramax and Paramount.
Certainly.
And so they go through this technological process where they scan every angle, every emotion, every whatever from her up into this machine, and then they're able to use it. So that's basically maybe the film The Congress, and the fact that it's done by Drafthouse Productions is sort of the opus or the overture explaining how this story begins, right? And that's the way the movie industry in Austin is actually working without, it's all there in sight for people who have the eyes to see it, right? But that's basically how the movie industry here in Austin now sort of works, is that, is basically that. Right? That you don't need to have all of these people to work a set and to do all of this other stuff. It's kind of like, the automation, like just like robots are doing stuff so people don't have to have jobs now, right? Like this is what we're moving towards.
This is exactly it. And they'll just the entire, like the model stays the same. The fundamental Hollywood model stays the same, but the technology and the platform is changing. Just as with every industry, which we're seeing, like we're literally in the process of changing the way which the platform, which people think about how their lives exist.
And so there's this part in the movie that I've been trying to get my head around, because it makes me think exactly of what we've already talked about, and I think about of Austin, and that there's these vast sort of underground like areas off the water here. Like when you go to, like, there's these places where these tunnels that look like some sort of sewer or drainage thing that connect to the lake. And my thought has always been, if I walk back there, I'm going to find something. There is something else going on inside there. And in this one scene in the movie, like people who have sort of escaped some level of the amnesia or hypnosis or mind control that the rest of the cartoon characters are under, are sort of hiding out in this underground grotto, right? Which is like, it's kind of like how would you describe it? It's an underground sort of grotto, right, like in water. It's like some sort of sewer. Like it's like a sewer grotto, right? Like it's something like that. And they're hanging out and like basically staying there to sort of stay away from the fray of the rest of the stuff, right? And so I'm wondering if like this area, because everybody wants to be clustered around this area down by the lake, but what you and I are talking about, this complete like mixed use environment, this complete augmentation of reality, is everywhere on the top. But when you go underground, you're away from that. And the people who know have it, or who either have access, or maybe even everyone can have access if they're in the know about how the sewer system works or whatever. That's where that's the only place to go to escape this 360-degree, complete, total, like everything, part of this digital overlay kind of thing. Right. And that they're literally like VIP rooms at like nightclubs or bars where like that's where you go to be away from the fray. Right. And so it's interesting. I'm starting to play with this now. So
here, can I respond to that for a moment?
Yeah.
All right. So it is my, whether you want to call it my fantasy, whether it's my inner knowing, whether it is my creation of reality, I don't know. but my inner sense is like that there's a truth to that, and there's a bigger truth to that. And like part of this time period is, and I think I've talked about it on our show before, is like finding the breakaway civilizations that have broken away way before. And like, and they're like, that's a literal truth. And kind of how you described, or at least the way I interpreted what you described, was like people are going to naturally figure this out. They'll go like, regular folks who aren't like thinking that there's breakaway civilizations, but they're like, holy shit, I got to go and find these like underground grottos, like similar to the underground villages or the sewer villages of Las Vegas. And like that is going to, they're naturally going to go, one, be disconnected to everything which is happening on that surface level, both metaphorically and literally. But then those people, they're going to find the what I'm calling breakaway civilizations. This is the time to find the breakaway civilizations. This is the time that they know that all of the folks who are ready to see them, like now's the time. Like that seems to be, as I said, like this is either my fantasy, my inner knowing, or what have you. Like that's how it's going to unfold in a couple different ways, whether you're consciously looking for it or you're just looking for an escape from what is being rolled out, and then you're going to naturally bump into it.
So, okay, so this is making me think, and I've talked about this before, but never with you. And I think this is kind of an interesting thing. So I had this friend several years back. I haven't talked to her in a really long time, but she had this dream, right? She for a period of time, she was having like a series of dreams that like were related to me, right? And one of the dreams that she had was that she went to visit me at this place that I was living that was embedded in a rock. Like it was like part, like, when you go through like Arizona or Colorado or Utah, you have those like amazing kinds of rocks, and some of them are over like a river or whatever, but they're like these huge kind of rocks. So like my house was in the rock, right? It was built into the rock. It was part of the rock. And then there was this sort of outdoor terrace or patio that overlooked the river, but the house was in the rock. So technically it was like underground, right? It was built into the rock. But the way that you accessed this was like through some like very weird institutional looking or commercial looking like office building or shopping mall, right? She said like when she came to it, it was like going to like the most corporate, like not even like cool architecture, but just like
right, like
an office park or a mall,
like suburban office parks,
right. Go to that. Like open the door to this particular office, go through a hallway and down, and then you're into this other thing, which is where I'm living, right? Kind of, like, which is where I'm living. And I don't remember, because I might be confusing a couple of different dreams, if there was like some sort of vibrational match or something had to happen to sort of get you into this other kind of thing, right? And then you go in there and everything is natural. Like all of the like kitchen counters and tables and the bathtub in the bathroom and everything is built into and made out of this sort of rock. It's not like moving other things and putting it in there. It's more like everything has been formed out of this natural thing, but I have all of the conveniences that we need, like a bathtub and, like a sink and a kitchen, all that kind of stone oven,
right?
All that kind of stuff, right? And all the furniture is built into the rock. It's not a piece of furniture you put there. It's all sort of part of the thing, right? But that I had, so this is where I go. This is where I live. This is where I spend most of my time, but I still work and interact out on the surface of the earth. But I have to do drugs in order to go there and tolerate the vibration out there, right? And so like, she couldn't remember if it was like cocaine or something like that I was doing. And we had a conversation about whether this was part of my issue with drugs to begin with, right? Is that like, I was using that to help me vibrationally be able to be in the place where that I was at, right? Because I did have some of the behaviors of typical drug addicts. I had a whole other set of behaviors that didn't go along with that at all. Like my pattern of use and what I did when I was using, and then sort of the way I kind of ended that was very atypical, right? So she came to visit me at this place. And when I would come back, right, from being out there on the surface, like maybe I met up with her out there and I brought her back, or she came to meet me thereafter and she came inside and she's like, oh, and it opened up onto this amazing gorge with this certain kind of rock and stone and water running through it. Think about what we've talked about over like Shoal Creek and the limestone and whatever here. And she was like, you had, when you would come back in after being out in the world, you'd have to take this particular kind of bath in this water with these oils to bring your vibration out of that thing that you had to do to yourself to be able to operate out there, right? And it was kind of a fascinating conversation. There was like a few other dreams that sort of related to this, but like intuitively that felt right to me. Like I would hide in some place right in the city. I wouldn't go way off into, you know, like out in the middle of nowhere. For me, it would be like finding this hidden spot, whether it be like just hidden in plain sight or dimensionally hidden, right? That was sort of right in the sort of action of it all, right? And then we think about Elon Musk buying the penthouse at the place where the portal is, with the Shoal Creek back there and the limestone and the water running through. Like, is that what some of these people are doing? Are some of these spots, because obviously if I've experienced them as portals, other people can too, right? Probably. But is there like, you know, is just the entrance point in the proper building, and he's, you know, walking into a space that is more like that which I have just described, and with access to some of these other underground spaces, right? And so like think about that. Like if whether his apartment is in the real world or in some dimensional pocket, right? Like where he's at would probably have direct access, either like vibrationally or even literally with an elevator, with an interdimensional oracle elevator, to one of these underground grottos that are in the rock that is protected from whatever the layers of digital, you know, augmented reality up on the surface are. And that's why this is the location these people want to live at. So they have direct access to out of that, right? They come up, they're in it, they go down, they're out of it, kind of thing. You know, it's an interesting thing to think about, right? You know, because all of these buildings are all clustered in a particular spot downtown. My guess would be that most of these corporations and most of these super high-end living spaces, right? Part of the deal of why they want to be there is they want access to that which you and I are talking about that is under the ground. And whether that thing be these sort of secret hideouts for that class of people, or that this is some sort of alchemical, metaphysical, you know, dimensional technology kind of thing that exists with this water and these rocks and this location and whatnot, they want to be right there where that is, right? And so whether they work there or they live there or whatever it is. So, you know, that some of the experience that I had this weekend, I'm going to save to talk about in the second hour, just based on, because I'm going to be identifying certain things, and it's just better for second hour conversation. But that part of the conversation I wanted to leave here in the first part. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I mean, right now, I think that we're on collectively, we're like on this really strange, the separation between things that were separated before is less. But what exactly we're separated from, like, to me, that's still unknown. And I try not to paint that into too much detail. But that being said, like, yeah, like what you're saying, like that would fit into that. Like we're like seeing things. I think there's a lot going on. I think it's more than just that, but even more so, what makes so much sense to me was the vision of how human beings would live in Earth, on Earth, with Earth, without like all of the programming and all of the other sort of stuff which has made us the way we are right now. And to me, like I get real specific with that. Like what would that housing look like? Like how would we do that? What would that human experience look like? And it sounds that's exactly how I've always envisioned it. It's very kind of also how you were talking about all of the furniture, the parts of the home were integrated with the actual material which makes the house, which is very similar to like a Frank Lloyd Wright sort of how he had all of the built-ins, this idea of built-ins. And what you're doing is you're building these structures for very, very, very long times, and they're amazingly beautiful. I think we're like bumping up into that. It's not just like, you know, we're going to like we're avoiding what we're experiencing right now as much as like there's just something completely different in the same space, which is incredibly harmonious. And we right now, as this shift is moving from the one way of the false reality to the other way of the false reality, from like Hollywood being out in California, and it's all coming to a new location, like during this change is when we have the opportunity to, you know, make a connection, which we've not had to before. And that's what it sounds like to me you're describing, whether it's exactly like that, something like that, you know, I don't know. But I'm that excites me, you know, those sort of ideas.
So take a look at this. So I just typed into the Googleator, the proper Austin overlooks Shoal Creek, right? So here's the Butterfly Bridge that we've talked about before. This is the proper, and there's different levels, right? There's a hotel level where there's some restaurants. There's a part residence level, and then there's a you know, penthouse kind of area that has its own thing up top. But it's right over the Butterfly Bridge that we've talked about, and then it overlooks this creek right here with some of these bridges, right? With these old railroads right here. Like, look at all this stuff, but look how there's all these holes. Where does that go? Right? Like, you know, this is the environment that this building overlooks. And there's a power plant over here. There's always the power plant, right? But look at this. This is right in the middle of downtown. And this is what all of these most expensive, like, you know, apartment, you know, buildings in Austin all are clustered around this little area. So that's kind of the spot. And that certainly looks like an area to me where we could find all sorts of interesting little holes and things to go explore inside, you know, inside the ground.
If you found a cave, would you go into it?
I'm really hoping you come to visit me. So
I ain't going to the cave. That's I do not like that. I would need a lot of like support to go to the cave, because the caves kind of freak me out. But I agree, like mentally, like I'm like, yeah, you're right. I want to go in the caves. I see people just like climb in caves. I'm like, how are you not freaking out? So I need to develop that. I need to develop to go into the caves. So maybe you and Laura could bring me in with your you could reformat my consciousness so I could go into the caves. Because the idea, what you're saying also about the bath, like something like some sort of, if you're going in and out, like we see in the movies, like whenever they go into these dangerous zones and they have to wear like these HVAC suits and all of that sort of thing. Like, I think that's a lot of bullshit, but it's pointing to a deeper truth, which is like talking about going from one environment to another and the importance of like the cleanliness and the protection, and the idea of going back to like something which is harmonious with the human being in human body, like a soothing, like oil filled bath seems to be, to me, like that would be the transitional thing I would want, not like the Karen Silkwood, like scrub your skin with wire brushes.
No, right? Okay. So look at something like this. This is right in downtown Austin, right? And look at this. So you have this stuff that looks like old and semi-natural that just abruptly ends and looks like what would be the entrance to some sort of underground, you know, kind of thing. But look at this. Like, we don't know what that would be for, but this looks like a modern version of this. This looks like the thing that was built to be in harmony with nature, right? And then this being the more technological, like control, like we want to have access to these energies that are underground, but we want to manipulate them for our purposes, as opposed to we want to be in harmony with what they are. And they pop up. Look at this. There's just that divisive line right between them. And then you have this, you know, sort of pipe or electrical line sort of right there, right? You see shit like this all over Austin, right?
What the hell is that? That looks all right. Okay.
So look at this. Like, look at, right? This looks like the entrance, like, you know, it's very unusual, whatever this is that you see.
Hold on, scroll this. Let me see the image on top. What is that right there? This view? No, right there. This is the view from the top of the reservoir cover. Everything below that concrete ledge will be filled with soil, grass, at least according to the model. So what? So are those wires? Is that cables? Like
cable. It's cable. Right? So these are the kinds of new natural spaces that they're going to make in these, right? They're going to be like these mixed, this is what it used to look like, and then this is what it'll look like when it's done kind of thing, right? And all of this will be the structure, the scaffolding for the augmented reality that everything will be projected on, right? So
Yeah.
anywho, so you see shit like this all over Austin, right? And so I mean, I think like what we're really getting to is that there's going to be two completely distinct separate realities in the exact same space, right? And which one are you going to have access to, or which one are you going to participate in? And how do, you know, like, and I think there's going to be all these sort of like blended levels sort of between. I think there's going to be this layer that's just completely false, right? And this layer that is completely like organically true on some level, right? And then there's going to be all this space with all these sort of, and I think this is where your idea of districts come in, right? Because I think there's going to be some areas where it's like, all right, well, we've got this much percentage of the original limestone still sort of prominent in the area right here. And then there's all of this overlay, and that creates this sort of blended reality, right? That leans more towards the false or the synthetic or the updated or the whatever. And this area is more like 90% organic with 10% overlay or whatever, and really learning to differentiate. And this is where at the conversation and conspiracy cocktail this weekend, my friend Jimmy came up and started explaining this idea of homeomorphism to me, and about how things, like, they don't have to be exactly alike to be like, so we were trying to understand how two things that are completely in different locations can like come together. Like, how could there be a room in Los Angeles and a room in Austin, but somehow they're overlaid on each other and I'm experiencing a blended version of them? And they don't have to be identical, but they just have to be homeomorphic. There has to be certain things about them that are similar enough that they can sort of become one. And he showed, like, you know, I found this interesting page. I'm going to have to do more research about this. So this is all I'm really going to.
What was his example?
So like we went, let me see, I have this page open somewhere, but I have 9 million windows open. So I don't even know if I'd be able to find it at this moment. I definitely left it open. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. Nope, that's not in that window. Let's check this window. Nope, not in that window. Not in that window. Maybe it's in this window or the next one. Is that? Nope. Homeo, here we go. Okay, so we ended up on this page about about the homeomorphism. So let me share. I'm just speaking out of my ass here, but like this idea came up that was interesting. So see this donut? That donut can become a coffee cup based on its homeomorphic principles. There's enough similarity. Whatever the structure is supports both things, which is really interesting when you start to think about the fact that like that's upset coffee and donuts go together, right? It's because they're of the same like generative form or energy or something like
so
that.
So is this like an abstract idea of the interconnectivity of reality, or is this understanding structures at a different reality where you can build upon it and create and tap into like morphing coffee cups into donuts?
Both.
It's both.
It's math. It's basically a high level mathematical concept, right? Upon which a lot of technology is based. And whatnot. So again, I'm blowing it out my ass here, but I'm just introducing the concept because I would like people who know about it to participate.
All right. Leave it on this. Visually, it's very simple. Basically, homeomorphisms involve stretching and contractions, but forbids cuts and pastes. This means, for instance, that disconnected spaces cannot be connected by below are examples of. All right. So the difference between the top and the bottom is it's saying that the shape on the bottom, on the shape on the left and the shape on the right, the reason why they're homeomorphic is because they both have the same cut in the center, right? And it has nothing to do with the perimeter shape, one being like a polygon, the other being a circle. And then on the ones on top are connected because, all right, this is real interesting. Okay, because it seems like the whole idea has to do with cuts and pastes.
Right?
Cuts and pastes.
Right. So this sentence here is pretty good. I guess we can classify spaces up to homeomorphism by the number of connected components of both the space and its boundary. So these two have cuts and pastes. They both have cuts and pastes to them. So they're homeomorphic with each other. And these two do not. So they're homeomorphic with each other. Right. And so you can, it's almost like another way of saying you can connect two false spaces or two real spaces, but you can't connect a false space in a real space.
This is interesting. Like on a certain level, like this doesn't feel like this is the stuff we always talk about, but I know that this is using a different nomenclature and is kind of looking at it from a different perspective. So I know there's something about this, which
this is the mathematics behind the phenomena which you and I speak.
But I still want to see how they present it in terms of something which is practical, and like, how does that translate into anything useful in reality?
So I think, so basically,
how are they using this information? How are they applying this information? These mathematicians.
My guess would be like, this is highly used in portaling. Right? Like if you have two spaces that are homeomorphic, either by nature or by the way that you build them, they can be connected by a process that ones that are not homeomorphic with each other can't be. And you can, right there, does that like, right? Like there has to be certain similarities. They don't have to be identical, because obviously the circle and this are not identical, right? But there are in some of their properties in that they have their original integrity. They have not been cut up or pasted. They haven't been taken away from or added to, right? They have an integrity to certain structure, and these are both altered structures, right? So it's kind of like when you're trying to, you make a file on a computer that has a certain software, and then I need to have that software in order to open it. And if I don't have that software in order to open it, then I can't. That would be like the cut and paste version of the homeomorphic space. Right. The more natural version, and again, blowing it out my ass here, kids. I'm not saying this is the way it is, but I'm just playing with these ideas, right? Like you and I both have our bodies in a certain natural state, and we start like listening to the same sound. Like, let's say that you and I both find like an area inside of a cave, right? Where, it doesn't matter if your area is square and mine's circle, but the dimensions are somewhat similar, and I'm in there and you're in there, and somebody begins to play the same drum beat in both spaces, right? And once we get going and build up a sort of enough energy and resonance, will I be able to sort of look over and see you dancing next to me, right? As opposed, right, like just by basically like achieving like enough of a similarity in space, boundary, and sort of frequency or activity or whatever, for there to be a connection built between the places.
Right. It's interesting to think about the same percussion being done in different places at the same time, which resonate in some other ways, and to see what could happen. I don't know, but go back to that image of the four connections. So what's popping out in my mind, I'm looking at this almost from a different perspective than you. I'm looking at this just from just the lens of explaining interconnectivity. And to me, one of the important things about moving forward is disconnecting ourselves from the current, which is bringing everything in a certain metaverse direction.
Right.
And so what this is talking about is how things lose their connection. How does it lose its connection? It's no longer homeomorphic. So my assumption is we're all homeomorphic with the entire technological false reality which has been created, the internet, the 5G, the this and the that, which we're bathing in. And that's one of the reasons why it's so effective on humanity, is because there's a homeomorphic, whatever that may mean, like whatever that mathematics, there's a connection to it. If you want to disconnect, And I would suggest, to me, that seems to me to be the most important thing a person can do right now. But, you know, that's for each person to decide. If you want to disconnect, you need to start figuring out, how do you make these cuts? How do you make these things so you're no longer homeomorphically connected to it, even though it seems like you're part of it? That's what I'm kind of leaning towards looking at this scenario right now.
Okay, so that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that humans occupy this unique space in that they can sort of exist in both types of homeomorphic spaces. And that's why there's so much focus on controlling the humans, right? Like maybe the robots can't operate in this kind of, the top kind of homeomorphic relationship kind of thing, right? And then, so my thing is, I don't know that disconnecting from the false one is necessarily the only option. I think part of it is learning to understand the difference between the kinds of homeomorphic spaces, so you understand what you're dealing with where you are, and learning the metaphysics of both, right? Because I think there's going to be people who completely go into the augmented reality, the virtual reality, the false overlay, like they completely upload themselves into that. And then there's the people who do the cut, where they're just like living as far away from anything that involves that as possible. And then I think the really interesting stuff is going to occur with the people who are understanding the metaphysics of both. And it's sort of, I think there's this, I've never looked into it, although many people have suggested, but intuitively, I think this is sort of what it is. There's this thing called reality transurfing, right? You know, basically like where you're able to sort of, you know, ride between the layers, right? But this would take, I think, you know, to just do that, to just be like, I'm just going to go into any space in any place and da 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 da. No, I think you have to understand the metaphysics of how the various places work. And the first thing to do is to develop the discernment or the awareness level to understand where you are, what you're dealing with, what are the factors at play. And there's an underlying sort of like geometry and homeo kind of thing that needs to sort of be understood, and understanding mathematics to the environment. You have your very natural, like softer geometry, like Fibonacci kind of stuff. And then you have like really structural angular geometry that is generally more typical of some of these mechanized kinds of like reality systems and whatnot. Right. So I think that a basic, like really learning to understand the differences between them, how they cannot play with each other, because my guess would be that there has to be some way that they sort of play with each other. Otherwise they wouldn't be so focused on doing this. They love the, you know, messing between the realms and whatever. But I think there's going to be some realities that are this, some realities that are this, and then there's going to be some ways that there is connection between them, but they can't ever be completely one or the other, like without that. So I think learning to understand that is like going to be the new esoteric knowledge. Maybe it's always been the esoteric. It's always been the occult.
Right.
But
so I agree with you. Like it's a skill set. It's a way of understanding the way things work. And like now is an opportunity to really apply it. In fact, you have to. And using like the example you gave, I think the movie, to me, the movie The Matrix is a very accurate metaphor, like how they're able to go from like whatever that spaceship was called, and then they go into the Matrix. And so they're not of the Matrix. In fact, they don't even want to be in the Matrix, but there's a reason why they're going into it. And they're painting like life outside of the Matrix really, really gross. And I'm not being that literal with this metaphor, but this idea of like, I'm going to go into the false world and I'm going to come out of the false world. And I understand the rules of it. Yeah. And so that's what we're talking about. Now, it's my personal opinion that that you're not going to want to be in the Matrix, that there's other things out there. And the only reason you want to be in the Matrix is because you've been conditioned to think the Matrix is good because you don't have anything else to compare it to. And the only reason you would be going into the Matrix or, you know, this other sort of thing is because there's a very specific purpose of what you're trying to do. That makes sense. And the more we can understand that process of how the interconnection works, the more adept we become with being able to, what did you call it? The reality surfing.
Reality transurfing, right?
Right.
My guess would be that in this very strange time we're moving into, that we're already in, but like it's going to just be increasing. The main reason people would go into the matrix or like the various levels, I think that there might be some mid levels that people might find interesting, but let's just say like the complete opposite, like the complete matrix thing is to try and retrieve some, like, is to try and retrieve like a loved one or something that got left there, or something that, or whatever, right? Something that's there that they feel they need or they want or they love, right? And to try and either just visit it or to bring it back. And I think some of this is going to be like, it's like right now, like people trying to convince their loved ones not to take the bite, not to believe in the bullshit, not to, whatever it is, right? So we've been in that process.
Right.
So delineated, right? Let's just say that all the people that buy it completely hook, line, and sinker are going to be in the matrix. The people who don't buy any of it are completely in the other place. And then there's all these level, like realities in between of sort of like mixed stuff. I'm just using this as an example.
Right.
So I think some people are going to go in to try and retrieve someone, to try and convince them to come out of that space. Then there's other people, someone's going to go in to do that. They're going to get lost. They're not going to come back, right? Because they don't recognize that they've done that. They don't realize that there's been a separation created between these realities. And it's not as simple as just walking across the street and walking back anymore. You have to really know what you're doing to find your way in and out of each of these realities. So some of us are going to go in to try and retrieve somebody that's been lost. And that's where this idea of needing to really understand what is what, how it works, all of these kinds of rules and laws of the layers of reality is going to be crucial. And it makes me think of, one of the things that I've often thought, and I can't remember who talked about this. This is like, so I heard this is not a completely unique idea to myself, but I think I made my own sort of, like, I heard an idea somebody said, and then I sort of expounded upon it, right? Like, I think that it's possible there was a time that we existed on the inside of the earth, right? And then people started coming to the outside to explore it, and they got stuck here. And then when somebody who went out to explore it didn't come back, more people came and more people came and more people came until we got to this place where we were living on the surface of the earth, where we were exposed to some other thing that was going on out here. And everybody's forgotten at this point how to get back inside, right? Like they've fallen out. I think that like entrance to inner earth is a vibrational thing on some level, right? And, whatever happened, the further away you get from it, the harder it is to remember that vibration, right? Or kind of thing. And so that kind of process. And so this awareness level of where you are, when you are, who you are, what you're doing, what geometry works together, what geometry doesn't, what technology is compatible with other technology, what isn't, what things you can do by your own personal alchemy, what things require some sort of intermediary kind of device or not device, all these kinds of things. I think this is the high knowledge of our time, right? I think just completely giving yourself over to it or completely ignoring it that's going to be for some people. But I think like most of us who are here and who are doing, like, just the fact that we have these conversations is the clue that we are in the process. We want higher discernment, higher awareness, higher spiritual enlightenment. And that doesn't mean ignoring things. It means understanding how they're working and making choices carefully, right? And improving your ability to, work these magics on your own without so much, intermediary devices or right. I think a lot of this is like, can I move from one level to the other without taking or stealing from the one in which I'm leaving or going to, right? And I mean that like on an energetic realm. Can I completely be responsible for either generating my own energy or coming into harmony with an energy that exists naturally so that I don't have to take it without returning it in order to make my move, right?
Without linking myself to it, without creating that link.
Correct, right? Without creating an attachment or as Jeff would call it, an agreement of entrapment.
Right.
Right. So,
which is exactly like the point I was talking about with like understanding what they're implying with cuts. Like, because a cut is like, because if what we're talking about is like, we're uncovering something, let's say there's something there that we're describing like an actual way of how things work. There then becomes an awareness that holy shit, okay, if this is how it works, and like what am I in this homeomorphic, whatever the word was, relationship? And like, how do I now disconnect something which I've already been connecting and I've been linked to for a very, very long time. And I didn't realize that was happening. Like, I just thought that was normal. And, you know, that goes into the whole idea of like, you know, cutting cords. Like, this is the same idea, but it's like, guess what? Like, I know a whole bunch of motherfuckers who like practice cutting cords and they seem to be in the same sort of fucking shit the whole time. So it's like the idea is right, but it's what, like, you know, what is not being done to actually cut it? Like, what does that mean? How do you disconnect? And I love the way you just described it in terms of like creating this feedback loop of where I'm getting my sustenance from this thing. And then as soon as I've gotten that sustenance, I've created this loop because I'm going to give something back in return. And now I'm going to, and like, how are you able to be connected with something without creating that loop? And this goes back to my entire outlook, which is there is no way we can be connected to this internet, to the technology and that without having that loop. I don't think that that's possible. I could be wrong, but that's what it, like, I don't have the understanding of how someone would be able to kind of go and do this. But, you know, the movie, the Matrix shows that they went in and they went out. So maybe I just don't know it yet, but that's how I see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that the reason that we don't understand it is because we've been given this one version of how the technology actually works, which isn't necessarily the only way it works or whatnot. Like, there's someone who listens to our material. I'm supposed to have another conversation with her, but she is an expert in a particular kind of technology that the way it actually works and the way people think it works is not the same. And so if you understand how it actually works, which does include things that you and I would think of as organic magic or telepathy or whatever, the use of it is different than when you're subscribing to this idea that you need this in order to connect, right? The technology is based on a natural process and actually takes some of that into use. That is not the way people think it works. And this is how you have this thing where like, everybody thinks that 5G is one thing when it's really another thing, because the process that's actually being used and the process that you're being sold on that's being used is not always the same. So understanding the difference between those things allows you to engage at a different level than if you are buying the version that they're telling you. It's kind of like the difference between buying your cell phone, like outright buying it and being able to like remove some of the stuff and use it in a more, I'm not saying that there's any way right now to use it in a totally sovereign way, but when you get your phone from Sprint and they give it to you either for free as part of your deal, or they give you a big discount, or you're on a payment plan, it comes with all of this bloatware and things like that, and all of this software and hardware in it that either you can't remove, or if you can remove it, it nullifies your sort of contract with something, right? But when you actually just go and buy the phone from a separate kind of dealer, and you come and you take it apart yourself and you do the things that you want to do with it and you remove certain things and whatnot, then you can sort of have there's a guy who makes these de-Googled phones named Ron Waxman, right? Then you can engage in a different way, right? And so you're not basically like, you're not connecting to all of the different elements of whatever that technology in that system is. Some of them are like, you know, I guess like some of them are more, I don't know what the right word is, to integrous portals, right? And others are disintegrous. And then they've overlaid some stuff onto some of the quote unquote integrous ones. But if you can understand the differences between them and choose to only engage the ones that you can ride through without like, you know, losing pieces of yourself, then, you know, then I think that's where it's at.
I mean, to me, it's like, until you can show me that being on the network is not like, you know, that's where the disconnect, in my opinion, needs to happen, because what you're describing makes a lot of sense from a certain reality, but you're still using the friggin' network. You're still using the technology. You're still putting your consciousness in the understanding of like, this is how I'm going to go and communicate with this person. Now maybe like, you know, the Matrix movie metaphor is like, well, there are ways to go in and out, but I don't know if that's the case. I think that's just Hollywood mind magic. Be like, no, you just keep on doing this, because it's like, listen, you could use the crack, but like, you know, because you understand the crack, you're going to use a different type of pipe. Well, it's not quite the same. I'm like, you're still fucking using crack. And I think that's just like crack dealers trying to tell you, like, you know, giving you a story. I mean, I say this talking on a computer, but like, I can't see I think that in my mind, like I want to continue to use this until like, you know, the one, it becomes obvious like what this is doing, or two, we figure it out the way which is it is not necessary.
So I think this is like the difference. So a lot like the people who are into making like synthetic psychedelic drugs and stuff like that, right? They generally like they base them on something which exists in nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the people who created LSD, right? They did it after using a lot of mushrooms.
Right. And they replicated the chemical,
right?
the molecular structure
So my
of
guess would be
argon or whatever.
that when you create something synthetically, it's easier. It's like doing add-ons on your, what are those things called that you put extension on your computer? Like when you have a program and you have to download the add-on or the whatever the extension, right? It's easier to do that with something that you have wholly created in the lab. So you have this thing that's been created in the lab that basically mimics this other thing, but this other thing doesn't have grooves in it that you can hook things onto that you want to, right? And so it's like, once you've done mushrooms, it's like, why would you feel like you have to go create some fake thing that is like this, that, right? But they do, right? There's a synthetic psilocybin, right? But so so I think that's part of the process, is discovering, okay, this is the thing that does this naturally, and I can use this way without doing this other thing. And then this is the copy of that they want to tell, that this is the one that they make illegal and sell in every pharmacy, and they want us to use because it comes with, you know, YouTube and Facebook and whatever on it, right? And so I think just this ability to really learn to discern, right?
Mm-hmm.
To discern. And I don't like, we have become very adept at learning discernment through research. And then after you do a certain amount of research, you get this sort of intuitive ability that, like, I've smelled this smell before. Like, I know where this rabbit hole is going to leave me, and you don't have to go all the way down anymore. Like, it's a lot shorter research process than it was the first time you did some of your deep dives, because you know what you know, you start to recognize the gas stations on the side of the road on this road to wherever it's going, right? That, like, okay, every time you get close to this, you see this, and this, right? And then eventually, like, we're so in tune with what the geometry or the homeomorphism or that, what was the other one he said, the topology. Yeah, topology was another thing we're looking into with him. You start to become so familiar that, you know, anytime you see this, it's that. So you don't even have to go down that road because you're
right.
So I think it's just taking all of this stuff, like the search for information is obviously really pretty much over at this point, other than in service of this other thing, and applying it out there, which is, I think, what we're doing. And so it's just kind of another example of that. But this homeomorphic thing, I'm going to do some more research on it, because I think it really is interesting. And I think that these are the things that we need to consider as we decide how we're going to travel.
Yeah. Well, so let me show you this, what you were just. So this is part of this thing I'm working on. And this is the map I made of Ready Player One, Steven Spielberg, Christopher Nolan, and Inception and Dark Knight Rises. And the whole message of the whole thing, like if you go through the storyline, which I kind of lay out, is that there are false realities and people are trying to trick you into thinking that you're not in a false reality. And the most important thing to do is knowing which reality you're in.
Okay.
So, which is exactly what you're just saying.
Totally. Right. And if you look at this one here, it's slightly different in that Nolan Sorrento and Steven Spielberg both end up in the same reality. Right. Whereas in this one, Christopher Nolan, so this is two coming together into one. This is one splitting into two. Right. And then this thing is just going into this one. So yeah, it's knowing which reality you're in and what those realities, what other things and who else those are connected to. Who created this reality? Are you in someone else's reality? Or are you in one of your own creation? Right. Who else is in this reality? Who's not here? Right. I look forward to seeing your presentation.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. So I've got some. Okay. Go on.
One more thing I wanted to say before we sort of get completely into the next part of this is Laura had something she wanted to say about Steven Spielberg and Mark Zuckerberg.
All right. What does she got?
And maybe you already did this, but I find it, you know, I took 4 years of German in high school, so I was pretty sure I knew what the names meant. But Zucker means sugar, and Berg is mountain. So he's like the sugar mountain.
Sugar Hill.
Right? right? And Spielberg, spiel means game or to play. And so Spielberg is a play / game mountain. So you think about sugar and how addictive it is, right? So Zuckerberg is like the candy man, and Spielberg is the one like, okay, now that I hooked you, I'm going to play this game with you kind of thing. So I just thought the understanding what the surnames were and who's like, how they may be dancing around each other, maybe influencing.
Facebook is exactly the same thing to this reality that sugar is.
Exactly. It was designed from the very beginning. And Spielberg, it's spiel too. Like spiel is a story. It's like it's like I'm trying to sell you a story. I'm trying to sell you.
It's a fairy tale.
It's a fairy tale, and it has different connotations, but like you're absolutely, Laura, I did the same thing with the names. And it's I mean, no matter how you want to look at it. So
and all those fairy tales lure children with candy. Right, like in all
exactly
Hansel and Gretel and all of these other stuff, like there's always Candyland. There's always this element of like drink the potion, eat the candy, right? Do that kind of thing. The other thing that's interesting, and I'm going to try and get this right. David Martin did an interesting video a few days ago, like before this whole craziness broke with Austria and what's going on in Austria as far as how totalitarian it is. He's like, actually, this happens every time. Austria is always the first for this to happen in. Like, I mean, Hitler even came from Austria, really.
Right.
My old gymnastics coach, the one at the gym where all this the weird stuff happened, was from Austria as well. But he was basically saying that, so the Zuckerbergs were involved in that whole first thing that happened in Austria, like in the 12th century and then in the Nazi time. And what's interesting is the people who are perpetuating that same sort of tyranny right now are the people who were the victims of it before.
Mm-hmm.
The families that got ostracized during that process are your same people that are perpetuating it now. Right?
Yeah.
So but you can track them all the way back to the first time this happened, where nobody did anything when this started to happen in Austria, and then we're surprised when it went everywhere. Right? So just the idea that like there is something or someone out there funding the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of the people who suffered the same thing that they're now going to perpetuate. Like these people are all chosen to go to the young world leaders, economic forum shit and They intentionally pick the people who have, what are you showing me? Yeah, early origins of the Zuckerberg family name was first found in Austria, right? Where this family name was a prominent contributor to the development of the district from ancient times, the district. Right. So there you go. So it's like, it's very, if I understood what David was saying, okay, whatever, this always prominent in social affairs, the name played a role in that turbulent region's affairs as it emerged to form alliances with other families within the region, as well as throughout the nation. Right. So I'm unclear. Some of the things David said sounded like the people who were victims are now the perpetrators. Other things he said made it sound like the same people have been doing this since the 12th century. It's like the exact same thing and whatever. But that Zuckerberg was part of the first version of what happened and happening now. And it's Sugar Mountain, right? Like, isn't Austria like some of the places where they say they have the best skiing? It's like the powdered sugar, snow covered mountains kind of thing or whatever. I think that's a thing that we think of when we think of places like Austria and Switzerland, is these just like beautifully white cut, mountains or whatever. But it is interesting, these names. So we have sugar, we have games, and both of them are mountains where you play this. And it lends to this idea of districts, to what you're talking about, right? Like sugar is the currency of one of these places, right? Gameplay is the currency of another, right? Tokenization, that kind of stuff. It's very interesting, Michael. I haven't watched Ready Player One yet, but we were talking about the other day, we need to.
It's both Jewish names too.
It's both Jewish names.
So are we taking a break right now? And then we're at about an hour?
Yeah, so let's take a break right now and then we'll come back. And I think you have some stories, and I want to tell you a little bit about this party that I was at that sort of helped me to like get a vision on how this is playing out. So
all right,
guys, we're going to take a break. If you want to join us for the second part, go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia, projectkids.locals.com or emilymoyer.locals.com, and we will see you on the other side. Bye-bye.